Shalom. So, today, Chazi sent me a video of his father speaking. And it's like, Chazi, like, why is your father not, like, talking to John Vervaeke on a regular basis? Like, he sounds like a Jewish John Vervaeke. And Chazi told me some bullshit. And I start looking up his father's life work. And I'm like, WTF, Chazi? WTF, Chazi? Because, like, apparently, Chazi's father, who Chazi never talks about, is like John Vervaeke, Paul Vanderklay, Jonathan Pajot, Mathieu Pajot, and Jordan Peterson kind of like rolled up into one religious Orthodox Jew who has spent the last 40 years talking about everything we're constantly talking about in this little corner, which is the intersection of society, culture, religion, mental health, and aesthetics and art. And so I tried to dig into his father's work. And I have to say, would have preferred if he wasn't such a Freudian. I don't even like Jung. I don't think Jung is very scientific. And so I put up with Jung. Freud. Honestly, I'm more of a Skinner type person. I mean, I realize Skinner has been falsified more than Jung and Freud, but I think that's partially because of sound must be horrible. Sorry about that, people. I think at least partially that's because so much of Jung and Freud were unfalsifiable. And I mean, I just started digging into what he says. At times, he speaks with the terseness of a Talmudic scholar, which makes it incredibly difficult, especially, I mean, not exactly sure. I mean, he has a mountain of peer-reviewed books and journal articles. I think I found 80 under his name, but apparently he's kind of been hiding under a rock because he refuses to have a Google Scholar profile. So, like, I can't even look up his H score and stuff. So, no metrics on this guy. But he has been a professor at Bar Ilan University for many, many years. and to explain Bar Ilan University. So Israel is about the size of Rhode Island, has a population of, I think, around 9 million. And so there are a few large universities in Israel, well-known universities. So there's Technion in Haifa, where my father went. And Technion is kind of like the MIT of Israel. And then the Hebrew University has like 2 campuses, one in Tel Aviv and one in Jerusalem. And like, I think Tel Aviv, I don't know the universities very well, but like those are like the Harvard and Yale, and like the Hebrew University in Jerusalem is like more archaeological. And then there's a, I think it's called the Betzalel Institute, which is like the art school in Israel. Now, as far as religious studies, the vast majority of people who are interested in yeshiva in religious studies go to some of the various yeshivas, and most of the yeshivas use either a traditional Jewish way of learning, which is very different from the type of classroom you're used to. So it's funny, but like, so this word dyadic that's in the, I put a link to the article that I kind of want to discuss today. Just it's just one of his most recent articles. This was published in 2020, I think. This was published in why does this not say when this was published? 2020, June 2020. Yeah. And so dyadic, I'm guessing, is his attempt to translate Chavruta, which is the Jewish manner of learning that's very different. It's I think Wikipedia has an article under partnered learning. Apparently, some people have started using it in computer science circles. Anyway, it's paired learning, or he's calling it dyadic, I guess. And so most yeshivas don't have a traditional, you take this course before you take that course, you know, that type of progression, like semester, well, kind of like semesters, but like you get grades. That's not how the yeshiva system works at all. Like you could walk in on any day, talk to the rabbi who's basically in charge of learning in any class, and he will gauge your level of knowledge and experience and pair you up with somebody who would similarly be interested in learning the same things. And your level of intelligence would kind of propel you to wherever in the hierarchy you belong. When you're studying Torah, it becomes very, very easy to distinguish between somebody who's much smarter than you and somebody who's closer to your level of intelligence, and like I would kind of compare it to like basketball. You know, like two people can play one-on-one and you can tell who's the better basketball player, you know, that type of thing. But it's intellectual. Anyway, so all of that to explain that most of what in so the word seminary in Jewish circles actually refers to girls' schools. So, but yeshivas are kind of like, you could compare them to seminaries in the Christian frame, but university education, as in where you go to get a degree to learn how to do something like be a psychologist or be a biologist or be an archaeologist or be any of those ologists, right? That's kind of it's a secular system that's very split off generally from the religious education system. Bar Ilan University is where if you are Haredi / ultra Orthodox and you want to, for example, become a psychologist or whatever, you go to Bar Ilan University, because Bar Ilan University is basically the closest thing to ultra Orthodox university that you can really get in Israel. Turo is kind of similar here, and you could say Bar Ilan Yeshiva University, right? But in Israel, Bar Ilan University is like where religious people go to school, right? Where engage in academics. And so Professor Spero, who apparently has been writing prolifically on the necessity to have a psychology that integrates religion and aesthetics for the past 40 years. So, like, Chazi apparently stumbled on this little corner of the internet, and he's like, why are people so excited about the stuff my dad taught me in kindergarten? So, like, this is apparently Chazi's life, right? So, like, his father is like Jordan Peterson and Paul Vanderklay and John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau all rolled into one Jewish package. And I'm not going to yell at him much. I already yelled at him a bit. But for various reasons, he hasn't been enthusiastic, and I figured the lack of enthusiasm must be from his father's part, and apparently no, it's Chazi. Whatever. I'm not going to scream at Chazi, but this is one of the recent peer-reviewed articles, and it's rather long. And I have to say, the parts where there is analysis, theoretical analysis, is incredibly dense, and I could read it out loud to you, but I am not familiar with Professor Spero's work enough to really like engage it well. I mean, I'm going to try to dig in, but this is the type of stuff that like Vervaeke talks about, and I'm like, okay, this is where I'm going to outsource my cognition to John Vervaeke, because it's I'm not smart enough. And just making sure that this view's fine. It's kind of sort of does. Let me figure this out a little bit. Okay, that might, hopefully everybody can see this fine. Yeah, so I think I'm going to skip the theoretical analysis, because this is mostly a case study. And I mean, it seems like a very interesting case study. I mean, as I was reading it, I was enthralled. So here we go. Vera, a middle-aged, bright, and skillful mental health professional, consistently maintained throughout the first year of her analysis that she had no imagination, and indeed exhibited during the early years of work a limited, stunted capacity for truly abstract symbolic thinking, emotional expression, and playfulness. I report developments within the 4th year of Vera's psychoanalysis, currently in its 8th year. Yes, he is a clinical psychologist, in addition to apparently also being an artist, and a professor of psychology. And an Orthodox Jew who obviously learns prolifically Torah and knows much more Torah than I ever, like, he probably forgets more Torah than I learned in my entire life. But on a daily basis, but yeah. During which Vera spontaneously began to draw objects, at first copying and eventually drawing from imagination. For a time, Vera was critical of her work, which was actually quite good, and experienced great difficulty acknowledging and appreciating the many internal dimensions and interests that her work revealed. This watershed development required an equally gradual interpretive welcoming on the analyst's part, so as to contain Vera's transition from preoccupation with concrete, technical aspects of her drawing toward a more mature thirst for the aesthetic, symbolism, and play. At some point, analysand, that means client, or patient, and analyst began to play with cognate associations surrounding the word, the Hebrew word for art, omanut, combined with the image of the nursing mother, omenet, and fidelity, trust, and faith, emunah. They all have the same 3 radical roots, aleph, mem, nun. This creative countertransference enactment eloquently reflected the spectrum of shared transformative aesthetic imaginative processes within both analytical partners or the emergence of the dyadic psychoanalytic artist. I think what he's saying there is that there can be a reciprocal relationship of learning between the supposed patient and the therapist. And I think that's why he talks about analysis and an analyst more, and he's talking about the dyadic psychoanalytical artist. Discussion elucidates what has been achieved and what remains to be achieved. So the key words for this are apparently aesthetic conflict, art, countertransference. I'm not actually that familiar with countertransference. Dyadic psychoanalytic artist. And this, I think, is probably his personal contribution. Faith, genera, I tried to figure out what it means. So genera is just the plural of genus. So I have no clue what they mean by including that as a keyword, but apparently they did. Hebrew language, imagination, magical thought, microanalysis, repetition. So microanalysis, and this is what I'm part of what I'm learning in my social work classes, is that there is microanalysis and macroanalysis. Microanalysis is of the individual. Macroanalysis is supposed to be of groups. There's started to talk about mezzo-analysis, meaning so for the family, like you can call that mezzo, and then macro-analysis would be on large group as opposed to small group. Okay, and that there are his qualifications, and I am actually going to skip a lot of this theoretical background. He quotes a bunch of philosophers I don't really like very much, and other people I wouldn't be quoting, but who am I to say? Okay. And difficulty understanding it. To the comments, you know, if you want to actually get to know me, join my Discord. We'll have a back and forth discussion. The streams are only a part of what I do. We're trying to build a community here. You're welcome to join it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to just the clinical presentation. The clinical material is drawn from the 4th year of Vera's psychoanalysis, currently in its 8th year. Vera is a bright, pretty, middle-aged woman, married, generally happy within her world, and holds several advanced degrees in one of the mental health professions. She initially sought analytic treatment early in her professional training, on the recommendation of her supervisor due to the somewhat blunt way Vera related to rather complex sexual tensions that arose during her interactions with patients. What he's going to say over and over again, I think politely, is she didn't quite understand that she was flirting with people, apparently, or otherwise could not conceive of. She was not properly analyzing her relationship and how her interaction with people could be more complicated and complex than, oh, I am the therapist, they are the patient, and there's not going to actually be any form of, closeness, which I've actually seen this happen a lot with especially pretty females who don't quite grasp what I think somebody who's actually paying attention would grasp. And yeah, this gets complex into exactly what's going on with our neurodivergence, is what tends to be called these days, or the spectrum. But autism or Asperger's, we seem to be increasingly having more and more people who are not properly learning how to interact with other people, and all the screens are making it a lot worse. But okay. Though once the analysis began, it soon became clear that she experienced a similar kind of obtuseness across a wide range of conceptual experiences or communications that require figurative appreciation, both at home in her studies and in her clinical work. Vera describes herself almost without qualms as tone deaf, colorblind, and unimaginative to a fault. Overall, Vera felt that she was mothers by the book, and works with patients by the book. In common with personalities who fit this description, Vera was able to rely upon her normative symbolic acquisitions in order to function as a mother and mental health worker. But in the arena of unpredictable intersubjective interactions, Vera needed to rely upon informed guesses and memories of successful interactions, perceptions, presumptions, and projections. I haven't read the notes, but this is, if you are engaging with the work of Ian McGilchrist, I think this is something that is his work indicates may be an epidemic of our cultural environment causing psychogenic misfunction or dysfunction in ways that simply did not exist before. Ian McGilchrist blames it on an emphasis on what I guess you could call left brain thinking. Obviously, he has a far more complex theory of the two hemispheres than the left brain, right brain distinction that neurologists first formulated and then rejected. And he's quite defensive about that. But whether it's due to that, or what's his name? John Vervaeke calls propositional tyranny. Reductive materialism could be another way you could talk about it. But what we're seeing, and he talks about it here, is what appears to be an epidemic of both social disorder and schizophrenia and schizotypical behavior, and add to that Jonathan Haidt's work regarding anxiety and depression. And I guess you could also add to that Jordan Peterson's work on substance, on addiction, which actually also, I mean, all of these things are interrelated. And we are having an epidemic of different psychogenic maladies than the historical record shows in previous societies. And whether you want to blame that on the Enlightenment or reductive materialism or Kant or Rousseau or any combination of them, there's a problem here that's pretty evident. And maybe it's simply that now we're more capable of tracking and understanding it. But whatever it is, there's a problem and it needs to be dealt with. Anyway, in fact, this schizoid mechanism masked the fact that the rigid, disenfranchised remnant of her imaginative process, Benjamin Franklin says, they have the black bile. They are suffering from the black bile. That's cute. Okay. Disenfranchised remnant of her imaginative process was nevertheless enabling her to perceive human interaction and self-experience in relatively safe circumstances. However, her professional work and initially the analysis itself were not experienced as safe circumstances. The analysis is conducted in Hebrew, the patient's mother tongue. My mother tongue is English, though I am perfectly fluent in Hebrew, and Vera often lapsed into fairly fluent English during various interchanges, so Hebrew and English meld, modern Hebrew and English meld often, and often people need to switch, especially professional people need to switch between them constantly. Especially a lot of college courses are just routinely in Israel taught in English, because the textbooks and everything you're dealing with is in English, right? So you oftentimes, and you have to write in English and stuff like that. So throughout our sessions, as the study of multiple languages in psychoanalytic narrative recommends, we tried always to pay attention to the potential transferential or counter-transferential implications of any apparently sudden shifts in quality or quantity of language use. I have to say, personally, I when I was doing work trying to better deal with my exposure therapy for my trauma as a child, um, I actually switched from a psychiatrist who had helped me very much to a psychologist who could speak Farsi with me, because this was childhood trauma that we were trying to deal with. And being in a frame of speaking in English kind of didn't work with that. Uh, I don't think I am comfortable enough in Spanish or Hebrew to engage in analysis, although I know enough Spanish to be able to, I think, deal with most people speaking Spanglish, which I think similarly, somebody who is used to speaking Spanglish at home should probably only do analysis, especially if it's childhood, that type of thing, with somebody who at least is fluent enough to understand Spanish. And Spanglish is not very difficult once you have some capacity with Spanish. Okay. While the analytic sessions never lacked for content, the first several years of work did not flow easily. Vera preferred to begin all her sessions with banter. Yeah, so this is avoidance. Rarely expressing interest in anything beyond the surface of her material. Evidence of her core insightfulness was clear to me, yet it sometimes seemed as if creating an enjoyable link between her concretism and my relatively more abstract or metaphoric expansion would result in a sexual and aesthetic experience she was not prepared to experience. Yeah, so it's kind of funny listening to one of the famous critics of this little corner. He was livid at the language that we constantly use in this little corner of the vertical and the horizontal. And he's like, vertical and horizontal, you're using those spiritually. And it's like, yes, we are. He's like, you can't do that. That's not, those are spatial categories, not conceptual, like not religious ones. And it's like, I understand why you may have a master's degree and sound intelligent to some people, yet have the capacity to understand of a gnat. Anyway, all that to say, sometimes people are so literal. It's like, what is wrong with you? My occasional gentle probing for further associations, pointing out elided material, or wondering about the lack of dreams or reverie-like experiences was met by further clinging to concrete descriptiveness, superficial or canned analytic-like commentary, or most vexing, intense questioning for leads, suggestions, and interpretations from me. Vera had portrayed her parents as having a rather bland relationship, each preoccupied with his or her independent pursuits. Her father's unimpressive intellectual accomplishments, despite his innate capacities, substituted for by financial success, and her mother's academic success, but aloof, dry as dust, schizoid tendencies. I have to wonder if he's still seeing her, if she doesn't monitor his academic, like this kind of seems like the type of thing that I would like. He says she's in continued therapy, and I realize that she's a professional in analysis, but these descriptions soon began to serve as the battery for a very brittle transference paradigm. I am not exactly sure what he means by that. As soon as her banter would fail to elicit much comment from me, Vera would remain quiet, insisting that she did not remember material of previous hours, obstinately cajoling me to remind her of her topics, or to join her in warm-up talk until she might become more comfortable. When I would ask her to try and simply make up a topic, or await some surfacing thought or image, or to allow the silence to take her mind inward, Vera would retort that she is unable to do these things because she has no imagination. And I have to say that, I mean, if you spend zero amounts of time in prayer and meditation, then possibly you could believe this of yourself. But there is no way that any intelligent person who actually spends any amount of time contemplating, like trying to not think of anything, will be able to keep their mind wandering without intense training and concentration. So calling this BS, I personally would think that suggesting meditation as an exercise, as a homework exercise, might have cut this period down significantly. But she apparently was in analysis for 8 years, the first 2 years of which were worthless. Instead, Vera, and I do have to say, when you are doing analysis, the point of 1 hour a week, and frankly, I personally think 1 hour a week, like, I don't think that's based on science. My cousin, who's a psychiatrist, he does 3-hour sessions, which he says works much better, and I can't imagine wouldn't. But the reason for having a session and then next week a different session is to allow you to process what's going on. And if between sessions you're not actually doing anything, you're not going to make progress in your in your therapy. And so homework assignments, I think, are kind of a duty that a therapist has in order to make progress fruitful. But instead, Vera explained that she was skilled at copying others' ideas, absorbing great amounts of functional data, or in conducting social dialogue, but she had none of her own. I have to wonder what Professor Spero thinks of Rene Girard. I kind of wish it was easier to read the notes. You know what? Let me see if this works. Let me see if the notes are worthwhile. Okay, note 5. We are often confronted with the need to explain the difference between mature symbols and symbolic equivalents. I think Green's explanation, 1993, is the clearest. In considering or evaluating any symbol, one must always imagine a triad. the subject who symbolizes, the object symbolized, and the symbol itself. In mature symbolization, all of the three stems of the triangle linking any of the 3 points are clearly differentiated and highly abstracted. In the case of degenerate symbols or symbolic equivalents, at least one of the 3 stems is insufficiently differentiated and abstract, thereby weakening any sense of 3-dimensional symbolization. These differences account for very characteristic manifestations on the Rorschach test. Wow, he's still using Rorschachs. I thought we were rid of them. But okay. For example, and exert characteristic and proportionate influence upon the range of object relational functioning. And exert characteristic and proportionate influence upon the range of object relational functioning. I'm not sure what that means. What he means by that. 6, here we recall that mimicking is an important aspect of Ferenzi's understanding of early trauma. The role of mimesis in psychic development and mature artistic representation is further discussed by Walton. I have to wonder if Ekoff, Walton, and Ferenczi are familiar with the work of Girard. Okay. That was 6. Okay. I was becoming keenly aware that her hourly narrations were quite void of metaphors, other than 2-dimensional similes to whose surface she would cling, being either unable or unwilling to enter into the linguistic weave. I have to wonder why if this is a important, something important that he was noticing. He wasn't actually trying to engage her with allegory and narrative. In my own silent musings, I would think of topics that I might have chatted about with her, but noticed that even my own topics suddenly seemed inert, empty, and too tiring to speak of. Well, this is part of distributed cognition. I began to believe that Vera might indeed be almost literally tone deaf, colorblind, and symbolically handicapped. Even calling her colorblind is itself a sort of analogy. So, beyond the verbal domain of the hour, I noted that the various aesthetic qualities of my office seemed utterly irrelevant, if not non-existent to her. So, last semester I had a professor who was 85 years old and still practicing, and had been for 40 years. And he had incredible amounts of procedural knowledge in therapy and zero propositional knowledge of the material that he was supposed to present, which just happened to actually be the legal and ethical obligations of a substance abuse counselor. And so he was going over all of the stuff that I had learned in law school from a textbook, which was apparently from a friend of his, because it was being self-published. And it was so bad. It was so horribly. And the person who had written it was not an attorney, and no attorney had seen it. But I learned so much in that class. Like, best, it was like $100 or something to take the class, because it's at Pierce Community College. Honestly, if you want to take the class, you can take it from anywhere in the world. I think you have to be you have to be a California resident to, but you can figure it out. But like, so what he would do in class is, when somebody would ask a question about the material, he would say, "Let's role play," and then he would proceed to psychoanalyze the poor victim in front of the rest of the class. He did this to me twice, and like cut me to the core with his really great capacity to analyze people. And he was masterful, absolutely masterful. But every time one of my fellow students would ask him why he did X, Y, or Z, he would give some bullshit answer, which was completely, I mean, he was just trying to explain something that he didn't quite understand propositionally himself. And anyway, so I learned a ton from this guy. None of it having anything to do with any propositions that came out of his mouth. It was really funny. Anyway, so one of the things, so it was a Zoom class, and he had things which were meant to elicit questions, including a large cardboard box behind him that said Pandora on it. And someone in class asked him about it. and he explained, I guess that was propositionally explaining something that was helpful, but he explained how he sets up his environment in a way to catch people's attention at certain things, and so he could understand their relevance realization through his office environment, which I thought is brilliant and obviously far better than the stupid ideas of the therapist's couch, where you don't see the therapist, and like psychotherapy has gotten so much better than it used to be. Anyway, as was the case in her own expensive home, devoid of art or interesting furnishings, I felt that the terrain, light variations, and artistic objects in my workspace threatened to crowd her out of what little space she perceived herself as having. In more than one moment of reverie, I myself experienced the embellishments of my office as if they were all husks, or in Vera's words, too much unnecessary stuff. The libidinal, multidimensional, vibrant aspects of aesthetic objects seemed to house, I do not believe that we could say that these objects contained, her sexual conflicts, and relating to such objects in the form of her own analytic conversation somehow struck Vera as suggestive of sharing sexuality directly. I'm not exactly sure what kind of behavior he is discussing. Like, is he saying her bluntness in discussing sex was the problem? I'm not exactly sure. We began to learn that Vera needed to anesthetize her imaginative capacities, lest these evoke in her frightening sexual longings, or in reverse, prove threatening to her inner parental representation, rousing them cataclysmically out of their own respective psychic torpor. Given the nature of her denials, I felt that Vera was aware, though only at the periphery of consciousness, that some sort of psychic work would be required, that on the surface she dismissed as owing to her being basically a lazy bum, but that deeper down would require that she learn to modify the concrete world she was too terrified to lose. So this was a major breakthrough I had in psychotherapy, which was I realized that I was constantly trying to distract myself from my fears. And eventually, in the therapeutic relationship and office, I was able to stop running from my fears and distracting myself and allow them to catch up with me, in which case I was able to then try to integrate them and understand them and cut them down to size, which is incredibly important. And don't get me started on Christine Blasey Ford's testimony before the Senate confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh, because completely outside the political context, I cannot imagine a professor of clinical psychology at Stanford being more ignorant of psychoanalysis publicly. And if you want to hear me rant about that, let me know. I will do a whole rant about that. I wrote it up at the time. The damage she did to psychotherapy in saying indelibly, what did she say? Indelibly etched in my hippocampus. Few people have murdered more human beings than that sentence. But that deeper down would require that she learn to modify the concrete world she was too terrified to lose. Yeah, being able to confront your cognitive dissonance and the pain, psychic torment. If you didn't listen to our book club and participate, it's still there, but one of the few books, there are very few books I have read more than once in my life. This is one of them. Okay. Vera's artistic dullness, as she referred to it, had an impact on her capacity to use the analytic couch. Upon entering the consulting room, Vera would saunter over to the couch and recline, yet very quickly would seem to become paralyzed upon it. I'm surprised he still uses an analytic couch. None of the analysts I have seen in many, many years. Well, they had couches, but not reclining types. Right. For the better part of the first year and a half of the analysis and its frequent intervals following, reclining on the couch created unspeakable dread, resulting in tens of hours of either partial or abjectly silent immobilization. I don't have an imagination, Vera more than once complained, so that what can your upholstered dream machine do for me? Well, if she's having dread, what is she dreading? Gradually, we were able to articulate certain sexual anxieties that were reenacted and then slowly representationalized by what she called the dead, flat, endless plane of the couch. By the end of the third year of analysis, now more capable of inner reflection, Vera became aware, as I had been for quite some time, that she lay upon the couch as if she had simply changed her posture from standing or sitting to becoming horizontal with regard to the floor. The idea of the analytic couch was not quite part of her experience. In fact, I often had the uncanny experience that I was sitting behind a perfectly intelligent woman who was somehow suspended in air. I can't believe these Freudians. Oh, God. Sitting behind, like, I cannot understand how these antiquated psychotherapeutic techniques. Well, I mean, this was published in 2008. I don't know. I mean, 2020. I don't know. Well, no, even if it was 30 years ago, who used Freudian psychoanalysis should be taken to the woodshed. I was sitting behind a perfectly intelligent woman who was somehow suspended in air. I mean, I can imagine in particular instances using that posture, but eye contact, facial expressions, a incapable nonverbal communication. I mean, these are important basic parts of modern psychoanalysis, not 100 years ago. For who was somehow suspended in air, incapable of rising or falling, and that the couch itself was an irrelevant thing like bit of wood and leather. Even as her capacity to articulate inner conflict slowly increased, Vera would often unwittingly shut down her fledgling imaginative capacity, at which time her sense of relationship with the couch and with me would fail, leaving her feeling frozen, ashamed, and terrified. I am guessing he was using a psychiatric hour of 50 minutes, because why wouldn't he? And spent 2.5 years with a damn couch and psychiatric minute when what he could actually do is why can't I? Well, I'm gonna. Okay, well, I'm not gonna want to bother with it. When a 3-hour, maybe even 8-hour psychiatric intervention face to face would have, well, if she really was stuck in mimesis, maybe not, but Freudian psychoanalysis is just so bad. What does note 7 say? Note 7. Contrast Vera's experience with Bachelard's description of motionlessness, 1964. As soon as we become motionless, we are elsewhere. We are dreaming in a world that is immense. Indeed, immensity is the movement of a motionless man. It is one of the characteristics of quiet daydreaming. Without an adequate symbolic network, objects like words and meanings were not inherently linked within a steady inner flow of dream experience and tended toward psychotic-like bizarre thing alignments, or to give a better sense of how I experienced her experience. Queer suspensions, that is a queer use of the word queer, upon which directional signs were tacked, posing as movement. Honestly, like, have her meditate some. In one session towards the beginning of the more progressive fourth year, Vera struck at an analogy between her troubles with the couch and her predilection for copying, imitating, and repetition. At this point, she would seem to experience a mild form of fragmentation. As Ferenczi said, the unpleasure that arises when certain connections are made is avoided by the giving up of these connections or unlinking in Beyond's sense of the word. Vera, I cannot start a session where we were previously because the space that there was does not exist for me anymore. I try to reconnect to that space, to try and recreate that space, as you say, but the only method I know, mere bantering verbal fodder, even though I know that my agenda blocks up that space. The couch is also a spatial dimension that I cannot imagine. I know, Vera signaled inverted commas with her fingers. I am lying upon the couch, but I cannot imagine it. I cannot imagine being on the couch, using the couch the right way, because that would mean that I have a special sense of what it means when I am not on the couch. Maybe because she is an analyst. If you want to jump on certain people who are my problem with the use of the couch is not my problem with the use of the couch is, okay, I have to say this about psychoanalysis. Our model of psychoanalysis, which has replaced your priest / rabbi / mashpia in more Hasidic terms, with these secular priests that you go visit in the confessional of their office, where they pay you large amounts of money, is that you are servicing the client as you always do when they are paying for it, right? And so if your clients love the couch and expect the couch and are more comfortable on the couch, then they're going to keep on coming back to you on the couch, right? And this is the problem with life coaches and much of psychoanalysis is it's not results based. And that's why actually So the reason why dentistry and psychology and chiropractic and acupuncture are such failures in what they do is because their economic model is so wrong. And the economic model created by health insurance is vastly superior, which is why the American Dental Association is so opposed to forcing, so opposed to actual dental insurance. Now, I have not seen the result of insurance being used in psychology and psychiatry being as positive as I think it should be. But part of that is probably because our model of insurance is malfunctioning. But like the economic model ensures that, as opposed to, so part of the problem is that as a psychotherapist, when you help a patient, they're not going to go around talking about how great their psychotherapist was, right? So every patient you cure is a patient you lose, right? And even if they do talk about how great their psychoanalyst was, they are not going to refer anyone they are close with to go to that same psychoanalyst because of any number of problems. And regarding privacy and intrusion and all that, which is incredibly difficult in family analysis, I have to say. But so the model, the economic model, ensures a. So yeah, I am not surprised if he is a very popular psychoanalyst, even though he still uses a couch. But when you use a couch and sit behind your client, there are so many things that you are not, in fact. So, like, just the capacity to um, fully observe the facial expressions is already one thing. The fact that the person isn't even able to see your face and see if you understand, you don't understand, signaling boredom is one of the ways in which a psychoanalyst helps in relevant realization. There are times when you should signal boredom to your client as kind of like, hello, start talking about something else. This is not a, right? And I mean, if he actually wants dyadic analysis, then just facing each other is such a huge part of that. And I have to add one thing, that understanding how we outsource our cognition perspectively and propositionally and the 4Ps, is I have come to realize that when we talk to people face to face, it actually allows us to outsource some of our anxiety away. Like when you are alone, just think naturally. When you're alone, you have to pay attention. There is a part of your brain that is constantly paying attention in case there's a threat or a predator or something that you need to pay attention to. Whereas when you're talking with someone, both of you reduce your attention, trying to reduce your anxiety, and are better able to concentrate, right? And so, yeah, no, you should not be using a couch. Nobody uses a couch, and I haven't seen anybody using a couch like a Freudian couch in Forever in 10 Days. I don't know anybody who recommends that type of office setup. I mean, 40 years ago, I guess, when he was getting his PhD, that was something someone thought was an acceptable way of doing psychotherapy, and he's retained it. But I cannot imagine being on the couch, using the couch the right way, because that would mean that I have a special sense of what it means when I am not on that couch. I couldn't lie on the couch comfortably, nor could I sit up or sit opposite you. There was just no space that I could feel I belonged to in my mind or yours. Honestly, it sounds like the couch is disorienting, and maybe particularly for her, such a disorientation could be an useful exercise. But just to use it constantly. Okay. During the spring months preceding the event of interest, the topics in analysis included Vera's awareness that she lacked any memory of having imagined anything as a child. In late childhood, I have to ask what this happened to me as well. I was very bad at art, and I was never challenged to actually use my artistic skills, but I was very imaginative in my linguistic skills, so didn't have that problem. In late childhood, she had already begun to notice that she did really know the face she saw in the mirror. That she did really know the face she saw in the mirror. Interesting. Not sure what he means by that. As summer neared, I said that we ought to speak of the impending 2-week break in the analysis. Vera began to talk about preparing her children for camp, and spoke of her more independent children, whom she knew would not write letters home, and the children whom she feared would be homesick and clingy. Using a couch is very rare these days for all of the reasons I gave. She then spoke of her impression that children are sent to camp way too soon these days. This is actually very true. And adults close their eyes to children's fears and anxieties. This is also very true. I have to say, apparently people have started potty training their kids as early as 1. Please do not potty train your kids early in order to put them in nurseries. Yes, I realize that you want to get your wife back to work as soon as possible. I realize childcare can be expensive but you start potty training when a child expresses interest in potty training, or the child starts actually like moving away or in order to potty, or exhibiting particular behaviors around pottying. that's when you start potty training a child. You don't impose it upon the child. It's a very, very bad idea. But okay, whatever. She then produced a new memory of being sent off to camp and feeling like a tiny creature surrounded by big and unfamiliar adults and children. Vera then recalled that she basically moved herself from activity to activity, participating only fearfully. As an afterthought, she joked, "I certainly accomplished nothing in arts and crafts." Okay. Yeah. Jacob hates couches. In theory, if you want to tap into unconscious, which can be easier without looking at the therapist, in theory, I mean, yes, but like, if you are using it strategically, maybe, but like, he seems to have a couch as a standard, and it's like, unless you are strategically trying to use it to accomplish a certain thing, like actually looking at into the face of the person you are analyzing is going to give you incredible amounts of information. Okay, where was he? Where were we? In Vera's recollection, no one seemed interested in reading the signs that ought to have made it abundantly clear that this tiny girl dreaded the camp experience. And so she ceased thinking about it and spoke not a word about it when she came home. Telling, she added, "I don't think anyone tried to imagine what I was undergoing." Okay, this sounds like bad attachment. Why is he not exploring her attachment? I don't know. At this point, Vera's face reddened, her gaze softened, and she became teary-eyed for the first time in her analysis. Okay, that sounds like a breakthrough. Slowly, she sensed the transference implication. For the first time since her analysis began, she felt that the break in the analysis would trouble her. The imagined experience of not having sessions evoked the fantasy of potentially acting out, of corresponding through millions of SMSs, handwritten letters, words. Poignantly, Vera was aware of the desire to write to someone and to anticipate a letter in return, whether or not such a development actually took place. The idea of handwritten letters was a harbinger. I cannot write things by hand. Her quarterly payments were often accompanied by a card with a handwritten message of gratitude, but there were no others. In the following session, with an air of surprise, Vera reported that she had begun to draw with pencil and pastel. She brought in sketches and pictures of all kinds of household objects: an apple, a tree in front of her home, some household tools, and a piece of sculpture shaped like an elephant. Her renditions were quite accurate and pleasing to view, yet Vera felt that the need to add that all she was doing is copying. At first, Vera could only relate to the right and wrong of the picture, to what element might be lacking. It was sometimes unclear if she was referring to a deficit in the image on her paper or to the object in the real world, for there was not yet an intervening or mediating structure firmly imaginable in her mind that would bridge the gap between model and drawing, and hence confusion would set in. Somewhat paradoxically, Vera seemed to suffer from a lack of pleasure in elementary figurability, even though she was capable of effecting a representation or merely a representation. See Botella and Botella 213. 2013. Well, I guess maybe I should look up Botella and Botella 2013 because I talk about representations and I don't think they are mere. When relating to her paintings, Vera would laugh or make random comments that helped her to maintain distance. All the same, her laughter was hearty and her artistic progress strong. At one juncture, I'm not sure that's the correct spelling of hearty there. At one juncture, I asked if she could associate to the quality of this laughter. Vera laughed and said that she laughs when having sex with her husband, which makes him very nervous, I can imagine. Why might you be laughing now? I asked. Vera replied, probably because this drawing is some kind of pleasurable union, like everything on some level. Vera was silently thoughtful and added, I might just stop drawing. No, I will not stop drawing. I couldn't do that now, but I would just stop bringing my work in. 2 moments transpired. No, I wouldn't stop bringing them in. I have to bring them in. And I am certain that you can see 100 imperfections in my work and probably can barely hold back from telling me about these. But I still love to bring these pieces in here. Even if you point out to me in your oh so subtle, indirect way where there might be deeper things to see in the work, and I am unable to get there yet, I still enjoy bringing them in. Okay. First interpretations. Through her tendency to downplay the quality of her work, though her tendency to downplay the quality of her work continued, Vera was working very well with the dimension of shading, better conveying the sense of roundness, depth, and distance. Her shading was initially scratchy, ending abruptly, not a finely grained shadow that fades off into the light, but soon evolved into smoother transitions in light and space. While shading is often interpreted as an expression of anxiety, which would certainly have made sense as she entered this new mysterious and obscure realm, again with the Rorschachs, I interpreted more her courageous preparedness to add imaginative representations to the world of artifacts. Soon there were more paintings. Vera admitted that she was trying to become free of copying, to be able to create more distance between the stimulus in front of her and what she wished to do with the impression created by the stimulus. In 1 hour, Vera shared that she... yeah, so he's using the hour. Again, I personally, if it was up to me, 3 to 8 hour sessions. Vera shared that she had just been at a good friend's house and saw a painting that she just had to copy. And when she came home, she did. In the subsequent session, Vera commented, I have no idea how I am doing these things. I only know that it's fun, and I am amazed at the progress I had since 2 weeks ago. I cannot explain why or how I am doing this. It seems like magic. These drawings seem to have just appeared out of thin air. To draw without a model present is to literally create something out of nothing. Yesh ma'ayin. Vera was thoughtful for several minutes, and I interpreted. It seems as if you are drawing, Vera, as you once wished you could, but were not encouraged to, or became afraid. And as Jordan Peterson constantly says, all people require is a bit of encouragement. From that point, you begin to feel you have no imagination, no mind, no image in the mirror to claim as your own. Now you are beginning to imagine and rediscover and even create the basic objects in the world around you. You are adding to the lot. The feeling is so novel that it seems to not be based on anything old. It is like magic, and it is not a copy. The rediscovery part does bring you closer to the past, where magic began, and the creative part also joins you to the present. Vera listened quietly. I had no doubt that she was processing my comment deeply. But she then said, somewhat in the capacity of patient as supervisor to the analyst, casement 2019, I do not know how I am doing this or why. It just seems to happen like magic. And I don't want you to analyze this yet. I want you to, like, hang my artwork on your refrigerator door like parents do and not comment. She's asking for encouragement. I murmured in agreement. Indeed, children do not need interpretive insight into how, why, or what they imagine. It is not logic and reality testing that they need to be taught. I felt duly chastened. Vera was entitled to enjoy her regressive progression, unadorned in the presence of a caring other imagining her imagination. I was attempting, and I mean, some Freudians will say, and I actually dislike this, but I think it can be true, that psychoanalysis can be parenting a person into adulthood. And I think that can be true. Very unfortunately, too many people, like depth psychology, the fact is, for the vast majority of people, cognitive behavioral therapy is more important, and you have to use many different techniques. If you are using the same technique with every single one of your patients, you are doing them a disservice, I believe. I was attempting to contain her new experience of no longer being suspended in a stark, immobile way, as she had once been upon the couch and in her narrative. But I had begun too quickly to representationalize instead of remaining closer to the emerging figurations as such, supporting her successful movement away from the sheer concrete. And while her drawings could have been considered concrete, she was drawing and edging toward more intermediary space between herself and me. Vera was now suspended lambently. I don't remember what that word means. I might have not even known. Between thing and imagined representation, playing in the nascent transitional spaces between the geometry of the object and the intent to simply copy, and the indeterminate terrain and unfathomable emotional experience at the end of her pencil. Second interpretations. As I found myself increasingly able to peer into the new depth of Vera's artistic experience and to acknowledge new increments in the transitional space we shared, I also appreciated that there was good reason for her emphasis on not knowing yet how the artist's mind works. In essence, although Vera was keeping a tight guard on her experience of imagination, the motive was no longer sheer concrete blockade or defensive repetition. Shortly following Vera's earlier comment about the magic of imagination, I added, part of your new pleasure seems to be the ability to share the imaginative work, to create a drawing, and to be at ease with the idea that two minds can be participating in the same imaginative moment. I would actually have characterized this differently. I think what is incredibly important for people who are too literal is, in fact, to have some empathy with the fact that some people view things differently, and um, being at comfort with that. Uh, Apropos of this, one of the earliest times I spoke to a poet, Yehuda Amichai, came to USC when I was an undergraduate and spoke. And I had read his book of poetry, and I asked him a question about his interpretation. And he said, I do not interpret my own work. I think of myself as a farmer who brings tomatoes to the market. I cannot tell you whether to make tomato juice or some other dish with the tomatoes. And the death of the artist is a large part of that. And yeah, I think in art and aesthetics, people are too quick to dismiss postmodernism. Postmodern Jukebox is one of my favorite bands. I think, particularly in arts and aesthetics, postmodernism has real contributions to make, and the valid criticisms are more those that Jordan Peterson makes. Anyway, shortly following Vera's earlier comment about the magic of imagination, I added, part of your new pleasure seems to be the ability to share the imaginative work, to create a drawing, and to be at ease with the idea that two minds can be participating in the same imaginative moment. Vera confirmed this. Yes, and even when I revert to copying, I know that what you see when I draw is not merely a copy of something, but a novel experience of my drawing. And since I believe this to be true of you, whether or not I am projecting, I am imagining. It's risky, but it's wonderful. I think Vera was telling us that she was learning that what she offered on paper was not the object itself that any two sentient beings could surely see in an identical manner. Very bad phenomenology. No two sentient beings see things in an identical manner. Such undernourished perception was by the book. Rather, by sharing an imperfect drawing, the object she was copying became less interesting and less pleasurable than the image that serendipitously appeared on her sketch pad. Vera, Ayn Rand's Romantic Manifesto may be her best contribution to human thought. It's pretty short, and the essays are some of her best. Not that I like romanticism. Vera returned now to explore. I still use her definition of art, though, as the reduction of things from how they really are to something more abstract. Okay, Vera returned now to explore the transference image behind her wish that I display her art on the walls of my clinic. Vera remembered that if her mother did display some product on the kitchen door, usually an excellent grade in school, her mother would remove it the next day because, in Vera's words, there was no longer any point to the clutter. You display things in this room, such as books, art, all kinds of bric-a-brac, driftwood, little sculptures, pens, and pieces of notes to yourself about what I imagine you wish to write. This is nourishment, not clutter. but I could not until recently see any of it as relevant to me, as having an identity and a history. The walls and doors of my childhood home were not intended for any extravagant use, not for play, and so a door or wall or even a complement remained a door, a wall, and a bunch of words. Well, that sounds like child abuse. Vera had become able to use the beyond concrete qualities of my office and, in her own words, world as psychic genera, Bolus, 1992. Probably not going to psychic genus, genera. A taxonomy? Okay. Wherein representational images and inventions wield a transformative power of their own. Countertransference and the dyadic psychoanalytic artist. Creative transformation took place on another front as well. As noted above, the earlier years of work with Vera had the effect of suffocating some of my own natural creative tendencies during our sessions. Sometimes I was conscious of a sense of restriction, lassitude, or ineffectiveness, and of being reduced when speaking to essentially copying Vera's words. Many times I would experience the historically pregnant and meaningful items in my office, items as a collection of anonymous one-dimensional props accumulating dust in the corridors of a long shut-down theater. Gradually, I understood retroactively, as countertransference is always apprehended, that I was responding unconsciously to deeper absences or deficits in Vera's representational experience and refashioning them in my own terms. I think this is what Vervaeke would call the imaginal. What I apperceived transiently, as useless clutter corresponded to how Vera's mother would have viewed the excesses in my office. And more than likely, as she experienced the surfeit of emotional realities among her inner representational world. The effect was chilling, stymieing, and isolating. One illustration will suffice. While I often doodle or sketch images when my reverie takes me deeper into the inner experience of an analysand who is communicating in very embedded, opaque, or primitive manner, I realized at some point that I never did so during Vera's hours, as if I, like Vera, had lost all imagination and could only perceive dimly the ephemeral jacket or outline of objects in my presence. See Alan Bass. This was painful for me. Seems to me like he should become more aware of distributed cognition, a la Vervaeke. As Vera's experience began to grow, this unnerving experience I had began to move from a countertransference bulwark to a countertransference enhanced creative unconscious perception and an informative manner of object relationship. I have no clue what he's saying there. As Vera's experience began to grow, this unnerving experience I had began to move from a countertransference bulwark, okay, a defense against countertransference, to a countertransference enhanced creative unconscious perception. Okay. And an informative manner of object relationship. Dance is right. Increasingly, my own not yet fully conscious inner perception of Vera's artistic world enabled me to engage her imaginative aliveness while also respecting the privacy of her inner world, as befits the conditions of the genesis of imagination. Cooper, 2008. Let's see what note 8 says. In this manner, somehow managing to walk between the Scylla and Charybdis of the communicable and the healthy non-communicating private dimensions of the mind. Winnicott, 1965. I think somebody needs to spend a lot more time studying nonverbal communication. The fact that a transference-based embargo upon imagination could ultimately generate the imaginative release from that embargo is one of the creative paradoxes that uniquely impel the psychoanalytic therapeutic process. The fact that a transference-based embargo upon imagination could ultimately generate the imaginative release from that embargo is one of the creative paradoxes that uniquely impel the psychoanalytic therapeutic process. I think this is what Vervaeke talks about when he means when he's talking about dialogos, the transjective, and distributed cognition. We think in groups with others, and Professor Spero seems to be very caught in the atomistic individual model, which is just, well, first, neurologically indefensible, but I think increasingly completely indefensible in every way. But it's cognitive science and neurology which have pointed out that this was a profound mistake. With whatever new words and increasingly rich metaphors Vera and I used to slowly adumbrate the changes taking place each hour, the ratio between concrete and imaginative communication gradually exerted its effect on the level of subjective intentionality and mutuality that the analytic partners could experience during psychoanalytic work. Yeah, when you talk to people, you end up actually connecting with them. In time, I noticed that I had resumed my own reverie like sketching and doodling, and my capacity to draw interpretations from these images, facilitating a mirroring of Vera's sketches and doodles. It was not long before Vera began to experiment with drawings of herself and also of me, borrowing from the images she found in the clinic as well as from her own imagination. Mutual imaginative wordplay. I wish to mention one other aspect of mutual play that resulted from Vera's re-entry into the world of pictorial and lexical, that means with words, imagination. This kind of play also had countertransference roots stemming from, among other things, the deeper tributaries of my love of languages and the multiple meanings of the deep, primitive word roots of Hebrew. Man after my own heart. Yet it seemed to be a natural outgrowth and perhaps a linguistic expression of the deeper architecture of the very developments that were taking place before us. A few days after Vera's repertoire branched into self-portraits and images of me and other persons, she mentioned in a modest yet proud way, feeling that she was becoming quite an omanit, the Hebrew feminine form of the term for artist, oman. She added, I am learning that I do not have to be so damned faithful to the form of the objects I see and the skeletal norms of the words I say. Again, I have to say, Vervaeke's, well, I guess I didn't say this before. I did say it to Chazi that it seems Vervaeke's invited talk at Cambridge is right down the line of exactly what his father has been exploring for the past 40 years. Surprisingly, as an artist, I also feel more thoughtful and a greater ability to contain as a mental health professional. Yeah, see all of the work that Vervaeke has been doing in and all of the work we've been talking about in this low corner. Again, Vera used the word omanit for artist and also employed the Hebrew word ne'emanah for faithful. I was taken aback by the juxtaposition of the two Hebrew words with identical root orthography, AMN, Aleph Mem Nun. That's not how you linguistically characterize Hebrew or Semitic roots. It has the same three radical root, which implies a relationship in Semitic languages. Though Vera seemed unaware, I experienced warm appreciation of the natural kinship between omanut, art, and artistry, the questions of faithfulness in rendition, and on a larger level, the capacity for faith, emunah. Shortly, I drew, I never really considered Oman and emunah. Yes, the root is the same root as the word amen. Shortly, I drew Vera's attention to her words. She responded enthusiastically and initiated a fast-moving, impassioned exchange of word associations. The single root AMN, Aleph Mem Nun, is in fact the base for a wide variety of related ideas: concurrence, amen, belief, steadfastness, certitude, support, and covenantal agreement, amanah. See Ben Yehuda, 1960. Ugh. Ben Yehuda, 1960. For the love of God. Perhaps most significantly, the root Aleph Mem Nun is also linked to the word M or Ima, matrix, mother, crossroad, and the nursing mother or Omenet. In these word linkages, I was wondering if he was going to talk about M. Yeah. In these word linkages, we find an ancient and perhaps even universal wellspring for the faithful containment functioning of the maternal breast, the trust required for weaning, faith in the internalized good object, and the psychic handicraft that enables the mind to negativize the concrete in favor of imagination. There's a rich tradition of this type of analysis in Hebrew. While I can't think of anything off the top of my head, I can't imagine there is not a lot of, actually, I would say, analysis of amen, the nun being a weak radical, and m, especially in discussions by people who, like me, believe that Hebrew roots are generally two-letter roots. Shalem being a notable exception. Katav as well. I mean, there are definitely exceptions, but I think generally the two-letter root theory holds. But okay, in favor of imagination, yes. Okay. This mutual wordplay was at one and the same time pleasurable, serious, and significant. The word Aleph Mem Nun and all the related concepts that this simple root supported and expressed on the meta level in each of her drawings outlined the domain of an analytic third, though the hard work of enduring the ever so slight negation of the concrete that in turn enabled the opening up of imagination, thanks to the interacting influence of transference and countertransference and its containment. I mean, I honestly think he really needs to engage with Vervaeke's work on Dialogos. Analysant and analyst contributed to the birth of what I have termed the dyadic psychoanalytic artist, capable of framing the dynamics required to separate from the concrete and to invest time, space, and language with a fuller symbolic dimension. I have to think about this because dyadic psychoanalytic artist, to me, I would almost just want to use the word chaver, which obviously is Hebrew. And then there is his discussion, which I am, oh my God, he's also bringing Lacan to mind. I am not familiar with Milner, Anna Freud, yay, because yay. Yeah, so that was the parts that I was interested in discussing. Let's see. Hello, Teo. How are you doing? Okay. It is almost midnight. Let me see if any of the people, I'm not sure I want to, well, not many people are watching. So if people want to come on here, I will put a link in. I was kind of sort of hoping that some of the psychoanalysts, like Max, for example, might want to discuss. But if somebody wants to come on, we can discuss some, or I might just go to bed, and because I am going to have a busy thing. Teo is tired of me and doesn't want me broadcasting so much. Fine, I'll go to bed. I can tell when I'm not wanted. Good night, people.